Mmm. Delicious. Tastes a little cottony, but as to be expected from the best of champagne. Oh, everyone, welcome back. As you can see, I've made it into wealth now. Yes, all the money that was held and frozen during the whole GameStop escapade is finally coming. And now I'm thinking, how best should I invest the millions I have at my disposal? I was thinking maybe to invest 4 million of it into a game. With all that money, I'm sure it'll be a good game, right? Hey boss, how you doing? Ah, my slave. How are you doing? I heard you were trying to throw money at a problem to try and make a good game. Indeed, if I were to invest all of that money into a single game, it's bound to succeed after all, right? After all, there isn't any problem that money can't solve, hahaha. Oh. Yeah, I don't know about that. Did you hear about the game in Japan which failed in spite of the fact that millions in USD were thrown at it? What? A problem that money can't solve? Preposterous. Perish the thought. Look, you don't really have to believe me, alright? I can just go make a video about it and then you can just watch it. That way you don't have to take time out of your day and you can just put it on your second monitor and it solves maybe your silly conundrum problem thing, right? Very well. I guess I could deign to accept. Go on your way, make your video, whatever that is. I'll be over here thinking of my next investment in the meantime. You know, I've been hearing of this game called Axie Infinity. It sounds like a plan that's sure to succeed. Yeah, I don't know about that one either, but you just keep thinking about your thing there, right? I'll be back in a bit. Right, so while that fool tries to figure out the losing all your money as quickly as you can any percent speed run, let's get into today's video. Although unfortunately for some of you guys, we won't be talking about the worst game of 2010 or 2008. Instead, we'll be talking about another game that I find to be just as interesting, if anything, which is a runner-up for 2009, not the worst game. The worst game is this one over here instead. And what makes this game so interesting is the fact that, while it may not have won the position of the worst game of its year, it does have the very unique accolade of being potentially one of the most expensive games on the entirety of the ranking across all years. And I say potentially because the only game that might even come close to this is probably Balan Wonderworld. And the only issue with using that as a comparison is the fact that we don't actually know how much that game cost to develop, just that Square Enix did put a lot of resources into it seems. But while we do not know how much that game costs, we do know how much this one did, which is about 4 million USD, thereabout in the equivalence of 2009's money. And so, today I would like to introduce to you guys one of the most expensive flops in Japan, which is Ougon no Kizuna. To give the game a very brief introduction, this game took 3 years and 4 million USD thereabout to produce. And it was such a catastrophic failure, selling only 1,200 copies, that it actually bankrupted the company that produced it. On Famitsu Cross review, this game received a 17 out of 40, which is a abysmally low score when you consider the fact that Famitsu Cross review tends to rate games very favorably. Just as a reminder for those of you who didn't watch the previous video or who have forgotten, Skyrim actually got a 40 out of 40 on cross reviews. So this is the kind of company we're dealing with, and in spite of that, they actually got a failing grade from that company. In fact, this game is actually so bad that the only reason that it didn't end up being the worst game of the year was because the worst game of the year that actually released was such a buggy mess that it was actually nigh unclearable. And that is the level of the game that had to be released for this to not be the worst game of the year. That said, while this game wasn't all that buggy, there was so much wrong with the game that even till now, I'm still not sure if the way I'm planning to structure this video is the best way to go about it. Because if everything that happened with it, starting from all the shady as well as strange practices as well as actions they took prior to the game's release, to all the issues with the game, and many of the comments made by staff that worked on the game, including the president of the company himself after its release. There's just way too much stuff to talk about. So what I'm planning to do is to divide the video, or at least the remainder of the video, into 5 parts, starting with talking about everything that happened outside the game, both before and after its release. Then talking about the game itself split into acts, and the acts are not really going to make too much sense in terms of the titling right now, but I'll get into that once we get into the first act, so you can just put a pin in that. We'll be right back with that later on. But yeah, obviously we're not going to go through every single small thing that happened throughout the game, but everything that was a problem, I kind of want to highlight, including the stuff that happened outside of the game itself. So I do hope you guys enjoy this video, and let us begin the suffering. Right, so there is a little bit of an issue with me trying to make this video in 2023. First, due to the fact that the company is already dead, so most of the stuff that existed from back then, including marketing materials, websites and all that, have all already been closed. Most of what that exists now is mostly just archives saved by people, be it what was supposedly the source code for the website, as well as all the different ads that existed for the game. The second big issue is also the fact that Flash Player is not exactly very available anymore. And what this means is that I can't even go to the Wayback Machine and access the website from there, because even when I did try to do that, it actually required me to have Flash, which, as you can imagine, the only way you can get Flash now is through one of those third-party websites, since Adobe pretty much just obliterated in all of its forms. And I don't really want to get a virus on my computer that's gonna steal all of my data and pack it up for some crypto bro somewhere in the world, so we're just gonna go with the information that's out there. Although, at least for the ads, they do still exist on YouTube, so we can give those a look as well. But yes, I feel like the best way to summarize everything with this game is that I get the feeling that nobody really expected this game to succeed. Not the people who saw the ads, not the people who played the game, nor the devs, nor even the president of the company. And we'll start to see why as we get into all the things that happened before and after the game as well. So I guess the first thing we can start off with is the very shady source code that was apparently dug up at the time. So for those of you who are wondering, this was what was embedded into the website's code itself. So for those of you who do not know what you're looking at, let me just explain very quickly. What you're looking at is the metadata in HTML. And what this is basically used for is that it's largely just used to structure and provide information about the metadata for the website. So basically, if you put something like adult or RTA, which is restricted to adult, within the metadata, you can ensure that for some search engine web crawlers, they will categorize this as a properly adult website, so it wouldn't appear when safe search is on and stuff like this. Essentially, to some extent, it helps with search engine optimization, and when you look at the ones for this website, you kind of see that you have some stuff that does make sense, right? You have the Wii, you have Nintendo, you have the name of the game. Like, those do still make sense. What doesn't really make sense, however, is why you would have stuff like Dragon Quest, Monhan, which is Monster Hunter, obviously, as well as Muramasa, which is a very specific game called Muramasa, the Demon Blade. So, kind of very shady that this were all being added into the text as well. Obviously, in the end, it doesn't really end up being all too effective. In fact, I don't think, if I recall, at least from information at the time, it did not actually manage to drive up search all that much. In fact, the funny thing is that through them putting in all of these random unrelated things into the text, it might actually cause the website to be categorized as spam instead, so it actually might have harmed their SEO instead of improving it. But yeah, it's a lot difficult for us to figure that out nowadays, especially since we do not have the exact website traffic data and stuff like that for their website. And it wasn't just the meta text. Supposedly there are many other issues with the website itself as well, because clearly, in spite of the fact that we haven't gone into the game itself yet, there aren't enough problems for us to talk about yet, right? So the first thing was the fact that the staff introduction was put higher up on the tier of everything that they wanted to introduce about the game than the characters, the game systems, and everything else itself, because apparently they had a drop-down bar for the contents themselves within the game, and at the very top was staff. Little egotistical, but in and of itself, maybe not too bad. Then aside from that, apparently if you went to the character or stories page, there was weird indents in the line, so like the paragraphing was all over the place. Apparently sometimes like you might even have stuff where in between a sentence, they might just have a indent in the middle instead. And also there's the fact that the website played audio, and if you tried to mute the audio, it would work, but the moment you change page on the website, the audio will just come back on. So if you were going deaf before, good news, now you get to go deaf multiple times while using the website instead. And on top of the website, you also had the very strange ads that they had put out as well. Those thankfully still have survived on YouTube, and in fact I have actually used them here and then some of my videos in the past. For starters, let me show you the first one that they made.
いつだって僕らは強い絆で結ばれている。これからもずっと黄金の絆、いよいよ。
But yeah, this one is quite normal. It is very strange because the ad itself has nothing to do with the game. But even then, this is still less insane than the second ad they released, which apparently this first ad ended up not being used for most of the game's advertising period. Like the first ad was made and then it was taken down and replaced with this second ad, which is this one.
RPG 黄金の絆
Yeah, maybe I should lay off snorting on the kombucha. I'm starting to see demons on the screen for some reason. It's suffice to say, this ad had nothing to do with the game. Even the song that's used in this ad actually has nothing to do with the game. It was actually a cover of a song used in a TV drama which just happened to have a strangely poetic name. The name of the song used in this ad was Bokutachi no Shippai, which means our failure. So I don't know what made them decide to use that song, but it did end up fantastically fitting in the end. Like, the song sounds great. It's just that with what happened to this game in the title, it's just chef's kiss to whoever picked that. With a total of 1,200 copies sold on launch, up to a grand total of 2,000 within the first year, the game was a catastrophic failure that led to the collapse of the company. What's even funnier is that someone actually managed to reach out to the president of the company later on and interview him, asking him if he was satisfied with the state this game released in, and his response was, "There's no way I'll be satisfied with this. That damn Crystal development company." And in saying this, what he was essentially trying to do was to throw the development company that assisted Jaleco in developing this game under the bus instead by blaming all of it on them. Because what essentially happened was that a company called Town Factory assisted them to some extent with developing this game. The funny thing was that Town Factory also within the same year assisted Marvelous in releasing a separate title called Little King's Story, and that game actually did decently well at the time, so it kinda made what he said then feel like a very massive cult instead. But yeah, that should be all we have to talk about when it comes to the drama that exists outside of the game itself. I feel like this segment itself is already kinda long, so without further ado, let us go into the game itself, starting with the first act. So you boot up the game and you're greeted by an opening video made using in-game cutscenes accompanied by music, which I don't know where they put the 4 million USD that's invested into this game into, but it doesn't really seem to be graphics. I mean, when you consider the fact that this game was released in the same year as Modern Warfare 2, Assassin's Creed 2, Final Fantasy 13, as well as Yakuza 3, this level of graphics is kind of very dated as is. If this game was released by a much smaller company with a much smaller budget, perhaps I could have turned a blind eye about the fact that Jaleco was involved and that they had said that they had spent as much as they did. It does feel very, very worrying that the opening cutscene is already showing this to us. That said, and more importantly, be very careful when you're in the opening cutscene, because the thing with this is that you're supposed to be able to skip it by pressing the A button, but for some reason it's very unresponsive. I think I had to push the A button like 11 times before it skipped. And if you're sitting there spamming the A button like I am, you might accidentally just skip the main menu and go straight into a new game, which if you're trying to load a game can be very annoying, and that will be something that will recur a lot later on. But yes, when you start up the game, what then happens is that you're greeted by yet another cutscene, this time of your main character, the scrub over here, and his dad fighting the Demon Lord. The cutscenes animations as well. If this was what they spent the $4 million on, they probably hired the worst possible people, potentially a con artist who only after receiving the money then tried to figure out animation, cause this tool seems very iffy for it. But yeah, aside from that, basically the cutscene is just the two of them fighting the demon lord and your father in the end getting corrupted by it while you just stand there and watch. And then, what do you know? Turns out it was all just a dream. Yes, that trope. Remember the thing that every one of us learned in grade or primary school where they told us, hey, don't do that when writing a story? Turns out someone was paid a portion of $4 million to do that instead. But yeah, once the cutscene ends, you realize that all of that you just saw in the opening cutscene was a dream. Your main character wakes up and proceeds to enter a chat dialogue with someone else, and yeah, where did the $4 million go? Did the president just pocket all of it and pretend that nothing happened? Why is the game like this till now? Like the whole thing, you look at the background, it looks very pixelated. The main character, the guy he's talking to, everyone looks very low poly, and like for a game for the Wii, I get that the Wii has like lower specs than most other consoles and the PC out there, but at the same time, this is very, very low quality. You have very drab and blur backgrounds, which somehow look like someone took a JPEG and just stretched it, hence why it's kinda more low-res looking than ought to be. The character models are all very blurry and pixelated looking as well. They kinda do hurt my eyes a little just to look at. There is no voice lines, there's no button to read the log of text that has already passed by, no menu, no fast forward, no skip. Like everything that would be necessary for a basic like text crawl like this is all not there. I mean, the characters barely even move to begin with. It's largely just the models stand there vibrating on the spot a little. Maybe they'll periodically move their arms a bit. But even then, for the most part, there isn't much movement at all. Like, I think one of the best examples during this opening cutscene is one of the scenes that gets memed a lot in Japan as well. This is the one that's called the $4 million punch. Are you ready for it? So, to set up the scene, this is still within that first cutscene. The guy in blue gets kind of pissed at the main character and tries to punch him. And this is how it plays out. Did you see the punch? I didn't. Apparently the punch was so expensive and so strong to make that you just don't even see the punch. He just does a flash into you and you just collapse, and this is a punch. They couldn't even be bothered to animate it. Like, where did the budget of this game go? For a more fair comparison, let me show you a scene from Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles: The Crystal Bearers, a game that was also released on the Wii in 2009. And when you look at this game, you can already see a very stark difference with Ougon or Kizuna. For one thing, the characters are a lot more lively. As you can see, their actions are more exaggerated, but also at the same time pretty smooth. And most cutscenes are like this for this game, by the way. And on top of everything else, there's also the fact that this is all taking place in a location within the world itself, so you get a better understanding of where the characters are and what the world around them looks like. Then you move on into the game itself, which the exploring of each of the individual areas within the game all mostly just kind of look like this. The strange choice to decide to show the inside of buildings not by having you in the building but by cutting a hole in the wall is also something that just gets memed a lot in Japan. This is known as the $4 million hole in the wall. Clearly the budget that went into the graphics was so monumental that they had no way to just animate walls, and so they decided to just cut a hole in the wall and show you within the building. I mean, that said, this is a style that some games do, so we won't like meme them too hard for this. Moving on, let's look at the actual regions map, where you try to explore the rest of the town after you leave the building. Yeah, I feel like at this point, everything that needs to be said about the graphics of the game have already been said, so I'm not even going to comment on this at this point. Instead, we're going to move on to the progression of this game, how it works, and why I have decided to split this segment of the video into the 4 arcs that I have, because I feel like this encapsulates a very big issue with this segment of the game. So one big issue with this town movement segments of the game is that there isn't really much of an objective marker to tell you what you need to do to progress the game. There is no journal for you to refer to know that you need to go to here or speak to who. And the issue is that, and this is something that happens for a majority of this game, they don't tell you within the cutscenes prior where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do next. You're just supposed to figure it all out yourself somehow. So for this very first part of the game, you're just dumped here and you're not told what to do. It turns out what you need to do is accept a very specific quest, which is one of what this game calls its Kizuna quest. So the way quests work in this game is that you go to a guild and you accept them. Quests are split into two different types, the Kizuna quest and the normal quest. And the way you would go through this is that Kizuna quests would basically be quests that would cause you to form a bond, and these bonds or Kizunas, which are in the title of the name of the game, are something that are supposed to be important to the game, although it doesn't explain to you how any of this is important, and it won't for the majority of the game. So the thing with the game is that there are certain segments of the game where the game will not progress until you complete a set number of quests. So the reason why I split the video, as you can see like this, I think the names have become very obvious, but it's because these are the number of quests at each of those points in the game that you need to fulfill in order to progress to the next part. So the games are basically being split to end where the filler for each of the arcs begins. In a way, you can think of it as the arc beginning with where the plot wants it to and ending with filler before the next arc begins, hence why I'm splitting them this way. So the issue with the Kizuna quests is that they're supposed to be important, they don't tell you how, and the worst part about them all is that these quests are the worst ones to complete, and this first quest best exemplifies why, in my opinion. So the quest begins, you are told that you're supposed to go to a specific area in the town and talk to a specific person and help them pass a test. I don't know why they need to hire an adventurer to help them cheat on their test. I feel like there are much easier and more cost-effective ways to do it. Hey. You see the person over there? Oh, ho, 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 ho. No. Oh, ho, ho, ho. I think they have the answers to the quiz. I think maybe you could, you know. No. Go. Wait a minute. This ain't the answers. This is an ad. And it's not even by someone we're sponsored by. Well, shit. But it would seem that that's what they want to do, so we're going to help them with it. So you go there and you accept the quest. They tell you to look for 5 people around the town who apparently are preparing the questions and ask them what the question is, and then come back to her and tell her what the question is so she can prepare. I don't know why the test is structured this way either, but yeah, just don't pay attention to all of that. You know, the plot is irrelevant in this game, just like everything else within it. But herein lies the very big and the first major problem with this game. There are no quest markers anywhere on the map to let you know where these 5 people are. You are not given the names, nor the appearance, nor even where in this entire town they are. And so this means you're gonna have to blindly run around town talking to people until you find these people. And even if you think that like, yeah, it's not so bad, you just have to run around town and talk to NPCs, how bad can that be? It's a good way to explore and learn about the town. But the issue with all of this is that 1, there are many NPCs in many of these areas. Some of these regions have like 20 plus NPCs and you need to individually talk to each one of them. Another big issue is the fact that the load in to each of these individual areas is also quite long. I think like an individual area's load in and load out can take like 15 to 20 seconds each. So you're gonna be sitting there for a while just waiting to load in and out of each area over and over. And the even bigger issue is that you cannot talk to all 5 of them and then go back to her and give her the answers. No. You see, that will make too much sense, right? This game is born out of nonsense and eldritch horror logic. What you need to do is look for one of them, get the question from them, then go back to her and let her know what the question is, and then go out and search again. If you find the second person, they won't tell you that you need to go back to her first before coming back to the second person. No. That would also make too much sense. Instead, you'll just talk to them and they'll give you regular dialogue, and everyone in the town is gonna do that as well until you go back to her and give her the first answer, meaning you need to make 5 trips And you somehow need to know this in spite of the fact that the game does not tell you that you need to know this. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the first town exploration within the game. If I sound like I'm a little bit angry, it's probably because I kinda am. I think I spent like 30 to 45 minutes on this segment not knowing any of this at all, before actually having to look it up on a wiki instead, because I was so confused as to why the quest couldn't be cleared. But yeah, this also means that you need to suffer through a massive number of load points, because you need to go out into the town, then go back to her. And so each transition is about 2 load screens. To just get her a single answer, you need to go through 4 load screens, so that's already 1 minute. So you're gonna spend at least 5 minutes at minimum in load screens just to get her fetch quest done. And that's assuming you know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's gonna probably double. You're gonna spend like 10 minutes in load screens and another 25 minutes running around aimlessly. It's not good. It's very, very horrible how this game starts out, and this does not bode well for the rest of the game, because this is how every other of this Kizuna quest, as well as many segments of the game where you're in town, are going to end up. But yeah, if you're a certified epic gamer like I am, pay no attention to the fact that I had to use a wiki to get through this part of the game. That's clearly a very normal epic gamer thing to do. You'll easily clear this quest, and once you do, the game will then give you another cutscene and tell you that a dungeon has been spotted and you need to go and clear it out. So the game then just opens up the dungeon if you leave the town, and you can go there and begin adventuring through your first dungeon. So this is an action RPG game, right? We finally get to have some action in this game. And this is great, because this means that I can now explain to you everything that is wrong with the main battle system, which is supposed to be the main part of this game. The first issue that you'll come across is the fact that before you even enter the dungeon itself, you would notice that the load times on most of these dungeons is excessively long, and it actually makes it quite stressful, because this is not going to happen for just this dungeon alone. It's gonna happen for every single dungeon throughout the game, and every time you re-enter the dungeon, which especially at the start, it's gonna happen quite often, you're gonna have to wait through this load time as well. And trust me when I say that you're gonna have to re-enter this map a lot, because of the fact that this game doesn't actually have a tutorial that teaches you even the most basic of controls. There are no explanations of what your attack button is, how to move around, or anything of the sorts. You're not told what any of the buttons on your controller do. Hell, I didn't even know that this number 1 on the Wii Remote would actually open up a map within the game until I was 5 hours in. That's how bad it was. Though I get the feeling that the reason why this game has no form of tutorial whatsoever is because if they did have one, it would probably highlight how horrible and boring this game is gonna be going forward. Because, to put it very simply, there are multiple issues with this game here. First of which is the fact that there is no level up system in this game. That in and of itself is fine, I guess. If it's stats, there was just the only thing that wasn't in it. So enemies don't drop EXP. They also do not drop gold. Gold can only be acquired from doing quests. You can't learn new skills in this game, so it's not like you spend money on new skills. Your money can only be spent on new gear. And so basically that's about all you get, and gear does not come with its own unique set of skills either, so every weapon you use has the same type of skills. You're starting to see the issues that exist here, aren't you? You're basically gonna have no form of progression whatsoever. This means 2 very massive things. One, your attacks are gonna get super repetitive very, very quickly, because you only have 2 attack buttons, A and B. And A is your light attack, B is your heavy attack. That can only be used after you push A. And depending on how many times you push A, B changes up to a number of 5 A's. After 5 A's, your combo ends. And so you have 5 different variations of B. And those are the only skills you'll get for the entirety of this game. The second thing that this also brings an issue to is the fact that killing monsters in dungeons actually is not beneficial to you whatsoever. You are not incentivized to kill monsters in any way, shape or form, because they neither drop gold nor EXP, nor any form of material to progress you further in the game. Periodically, the game would use them to block your way and prevent you from progressing. But even then, the game does not tell you that you need to beat those specific monsters to progress until I think like the 3rd time that actually happens. So that's a little late. Which basically means that aside from the very key monsters within the dungeon, you're not really incentivized to fight at all. So you're just going to want to dodge everything within the dungeon and not interact with anything. Which, if you think that sounds like it might be an interesting and fun way to play the game, think again, because the thing is, whenever the monsters spawn in, there's a very obnoxiously strong spawn sound, and they also start to make their own individual sounds, which means that when you run through the dungeon, it's going to sound like this. Yes! Music to my ears! Can you feel it? Oh, can you feel it? The cacophony! Oh, it's so good, I'm gonna kill myself. And on top of that is also the fact that enemies are spawning in very huge numbers randomly. So that means that you have a very high chance to get surrounded. And if you do, there's another very big issue, which is the fact that when you get hit, there is no invulnerability frame until you can get hit again. You can basically just get perma-stun locked to death because every time an enemy hits you, you're gonna get staggered a little. And with the huge number of enemies here, it essentially means that what can happen is that a bunch of enemies will just swarm or surround you due to the fact that you didn't pay attention for 1 second. They'll all hit you once, you get perma-stun locked and just... Yeah, so not the most fun way to have to progress through a dungeon, especially when you consider everything up to this point. Also, I couldn't actually verify this myself because it's very hard to compare the stats between the two, but according to speedrunners of this game, because yes, those kind of master cheats do exist. They do mention that within these blocks of enemies, there are also sometimes mixed in enemies that look identical but have triple the stats of everything else within the blob, and when this happens it's random, meaning if those enemies are within the blob, an enemy that would typically do chip damage to you could potentially just do massive amounts of damage and put you almost instantly to death, especially if there's more than one of them within the blob. So yeah, just even trying to run through stuff puts you at very massive risk of dying. And you know, all of this, you could say that like, oh yeah, if the dungeon is small, at least the suffering wouldn't be too bad, right? But here's the thing with this game. Nothing in this game is simple, other than the plot and the battle system being overly simplistic. Instead, everything in this game is designed in a way to make you suffer as much as possible, because the maps are really massive. To travel from one end of the map to the other could take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes for some of these maps. Some of them could even take up to 20 minutes. And the thing is that you do not have any form of marker on the map to let you know where to exit from, other than this come stain at the exit points, which is basically just there to tell you that that is where you can exit the maps from. The thing is that that sounds fine, like you could easily see where you need to get to and just run there, right? But the thing is that while you can open the map only shows you a zoomed in segment of where you are. And no, if you think that you can move the map around to see where the exit is or observe the rest of the map, that would be silly. Why would they do that? It's not like player usability and friendliness is a thing with this game. Are you high or something? Perhaps you're the one who has been consuming too much G fuel in your food. But even if you did know where the exit was, sometimes it's not very straightforward, because what the game likes to do is to put up these white crystals along certain passageways, which can't be seen on the map. And the only way to unlock these passageways is to kill certain key monsters. Like in this case, the monster's right in front of it, and you just have to kill 2 of them and then it breaks the crystal, so it's very easy to understand what to do. The thing is, the game doesn't really tell you that you need to do this, and the enemies look the same as every other enemy, so it's kind of very unintuitive that this specific enemies you would have to beat in order to unlock it. At first I thought you just had to attack it, but attacking it does nothing as well. Speaking of maps, you know what else is a map? This god-awful thing in the top right hand corner of the screen right here, which does not have any compass directions on it, nor does it show you the terrain around you. The only thing it really does is show you where enemies are around your cone of vision. The issue with that is that when enemies are half the time spawning everywhere around you, you're basically just gonna see red blobs everywhere around you, so more than 90% of the time this map is gonna be useless. Periodically, when there's like only one enemy left at the very end, it could help you find that one enemy, but that's about it. Nothing too useful, to be honest. I don't even know why it's there. And speaking of another thing that I do not know why it's there, there's this red bar on top of your HP bar, that's your TP bar. TP is a stat which I do not know what it stands for. Not that it matters, because that bar is never used within the game. TP is a stat that you kinda have, but you'll never use in the entirety of this game. It's not like using your B button skills. So no one actually knows what it's for, and no one actually uses it, not even the speedrunners. Speaking of speedrunning, you know what else is speedrunning? The BGM of this dungeon, which is on a 10-second loop. Why did I play this game again? Oh yeah, right, it's because I really wanted to suffer. Oh, you know what else is also suffering? The fact that if you die within the dungeon, you're not just sent to a continue menu or a load game where you load back into the main town or something. What's gonna happen is that the game immediately fades to a game over screen, and from there it immediately just sends you straight back to the main menu, before the opening video plays, which means you need to skip the main video again. Yeah, it doesn't even put you just back on the new game continue screen. You go all the way back. And like I mentioned before, remember how I said that the video was unresponsive? Yeah, so every time you get sent back to the menu, which is gonna happen quite a lot, especially at the start of the game, you have no idea what you're supposed to do, because the game never explains anything, you're gonna have to like spam A to get through the screen, and if you spam A too much, you're gonna start a new game, which means you're gonna have to push the home button, reset the game, and do the whole thing again, and try to be careful this time, and the whole thing is just horrible. Yeah, there are a lot of issues with the battle system, as you can see. These are all the ones we've talked about so far. We're almost through all of this. I think there's like maybe 2 or 3 more before we're done, so let's get through them as quickly as possible. So when it comes to using items in the dungeon, you can. They kind of work with the same system as Dark Souls, where you push the analog on your controller, which on the Wii is this ones here. And it is set up in a way that you need to equip them to the 4 analog buttons, and you just push the button to use whatever's in the slot. The issue with it in this game is that 1, it's not explained to you that you need to set it up in the first place. And 2, you can't equip stuff while you're in the dungeon, meaning that you cannot react actively to enemy types. And if you run out of a certain type of potion, because unlike Dark Souls where you just have the Estus Flask, this game has multiple healing potions, multiple buff potions, and so if you want to set everything, if you run out of a specific type of potion, you can't just then in the middle of the dungeon swap it even if there are no enemies around you. Because the thing is that your menu can only be opened while you're in town, and not at the menu selecting which part of town you want to enter, like only in the actual roaming parts in town. And for the last point on the list, which, yeah, we're finally at the end of all of it, and I don't know why I put this point at the end, since it's probably one of the more important points and one that annoyed me greatly, is the fact that you can't actually actively position where your camera is facing. So the thing is that you control in this game using both of these parts of the controllers. This is your standard Wii remote and this is a nunchuck. So there isn't actually anything on either of this that is used for camera control other than this one button up here. This one. This is used for movement. This is used for the items. So you really don't have a way to control it other than this. And when I said it, I don't mean you push this down and then you use this or this. No. You push this button down and then it centers behind you. And that's the only way you can control the camera. You set it to instantly go behind your character. So the only way you can shift the camera angle at all is to turn your character's facing and constantly spam the Z button so that it actually turns like that together with him. You can't actively rotate it and see where the enemy is on your left or right or behind you. You can't actually lock on to them like in Dark Souls either. It also does feel a little disorientating seeing it constantly blur as it moves left and right as well. So yeah, it's very poorly designed camera system as well. But yeah, for the first boss in the game, it's just at the end of the dungeon. You're not given any explanation of what the boss exactly is or why it's there or why you're there to beat it, other than Big Bad is in bad place and you are a good man who goes and beats the bad thing. But yeah, this boss battle itself isn't very entertaining either. Let me just break down the boss battle very simply because there isn't all too much to it. So first up is the fact that this boss has 2 long range attacks that he will 100% use while you're running up to him, and neither of these attacks can be blocked nor dodged. Because you only have a block button, you have no way to dodge roll like in Dark Souls, that's another thing. And the thing is that these 2 are unavoidable and they are likely to do at least 50% of your starting HP and damage. Remember, you have no way to level up and your only way to actually get better stats is through gear, but there isn't any good gear that can increase your HP nor defense high enough at the start, so it is likely to chunk at least 50% of your HP the moment you enter the dungeon. In the worst case, it will use both of the attacks, meaning that it could actually bring you from 100 to 0 the moment you enter the dungeon with you having no way to respawn. But if you're lucky enough to manage to get close to him, or if you're stocked up on enough potions in spite of the fact that the game doesn't tell you how to use potions, you will then be able to get close enough to attack him. And at this point of the game, it gets super boring to deal with the boss because the boss only really has 3 different attack patterns. If you're at a moderate range away from him, he will try to slam his hand down on you, and that's the only action he will do. If you're right below his feet, he alternates between trying to stomp his feet to hurt you and doing a much smaller stomp as he tries to turn and orientate himself towards you so he can do the bigger stomp on you again. So really all he's gonna do is alternate between 2 different stomping animations when you're within short range of him. Moderate range, he has only 1 attack. The worst part of all of this is just the fact that the game does not tell you what you actually need to do to beat the boss, because they kind of do have a unique system to it where you're not just gonna hit the boss until it dies. Instead, you need to knock the boss down and break certain parts of the boss, and then you need to do some QTEs to beat it in the end. The issue is the game, like I said, does not tell you what to do. So you're just gonna run below the boss, hit its legs until it falls down, and then the game will just tell you, hey, you gotta find a part to climb to get up the boss. And the part is the left hand, which they do not tell you. When you find the left hand though, and you do try to climb it, you're just gonna climb up and the game is gonna have the boss do this to you. Oh! I'm pretty sure they should have explained that before asking you to jump on the left hand. Instead, like, that would have made more sense rather than punishing you for following their instructions. But yeah, that's the entire flow of it. You need to knock him down after you break his right hand, which you can do in two different ways. Either you knock him down and hit his hand while he's vulnerable on the ground, or you just stay at mid-range and make him slam the ground and hit his hand until the hand finally breaks. And then you go in and knock him down, and then you climb up the left hand instead. And then once you climb up the left hand and you finally succeed at going up, the game then tells you that you need to perform a QTE to actually finish off the boss. But for this first dungeon, instead of letting you learn how to do it and experiment, they're gonna let him do it for you. So you better remember to do it the next time you meet another boss, cause if you forget and you think that it's gonna be automatic once you get up there because the game did it the first time, you're basically gonna have done exactly what I did, and I feel very stupid for doing that. But yeah, that's pretty much the flow of an entire dungeon within this game. You just run aimlessly around the floor of a dungeon until you kill very specific enemies that unlock certain crystals so you can progress further, or while being bombarded with sounds that I'm pretty sure could be used in CIA torture chambers and that would actually work really well. And then once you get to the end of all of this, you just see a boss which has very limited numbers of attack patterns. You just keep hitting it until it falls down and dies from QTEs. I do hope you're ready for more, because this is pretty much going to be every single dungeon within this game. That said, once you beat the boss, you're then greeted by a cutscene where the son of the demon lord that sealed your father away appears before you and smugly talks to you for a little bit before kicking your ass faster than you can say, this game is really bad, isn't it? And the only reason why we're talking about this cutscene is about the fact that I mentioned that we wouldn't talk about most of the cutscenes in this game, is due to the fact that this gives me a chance to introduce him to you. Because you see, the thing with this demon lord's son is that he's actually voiced by the voice actor who voices Saitama from One Punch Man. Like, this is actually us getting to see him in his earlier years, where he was actually for some reason voicing in this game. You know, I really hope that one day, if he actually does an interview outside, that someone would ask him how it felt like to actually work on this game, because I genuinely would love to know. But yeah, this is just a little bit of a tidbit for those of you who are interested. Though, since we're on the topic of voice actors, I feel like I may as well talk about this as well. But all of the voice actors in this game, including Saitama's voice actor at the time, were basically from vocational schools, basically students learning to become voice actors. Every single one of them. There is no big name involved. And like, if you look at most of the names on that list, most of them aren't even voice actors and didn't become big voice actors now, so yeah, it's like they just hired a bunch of people who are basically nobodies at the time to get to do the voice acting for this game, which also brings up the question of where did that 4 million go? It didn't go into big names for voice acting either. I mean, when you look at the credits for Furukawa Makoto as well, you realize that most of it starts from 2012 onwards. So this game is not even being listed as one of the things that he is credited for voice acting, even though his name is also in the credits. Which is just a little bit of a funny, but at this point we're already very close to the end of the arc. After you get knocked down by the boss, someone comes in. The boss, instead of just finishing you off there when he can, someone clicks his tongue that someone else is coming to save you and decides to escape and leave you alive long enough for the other person to run in and save you when you're knocked out. After this, the game then just goes into a conversation between characters who aren't you, and after their conversation is over, your character wakes up. You don't really get a sense of what you're supposed to do next, and this is where we reach the point in the end of the arc, which I was talking about before. In order to progress the game from this point on, you need to complete another few quests until cumulatively you have completed 8 quests within the entire game. So excluding the Kizuna quest you completed at the start, the Bond quest, you still need to complete 7 more. Obviously, we are not going to do any more of the Bond quests because in spite of the fact that Bond is in the game's names, we don't really need bonds in this game except with one specific person who will turn up later on. But aside from that person, we don't really need to care about bonds with anyone else. Instead, we're just gonna do all the regular quests because not only do they pay more, one of these quests on average lasts maybe 5 to 10 minutes and they drop you directly into the zone, and all you really have to do in that zone is just kill all the enemies in there. So it's also very easy to understand, and thus you don't have to worry about getting lost as well. Unlike with all these bond quests which can take upwards of 30 minutes if you don't know what you're doing. Which brings us then to another issue, which is that the quests in this game aren't exactly very entertaining either. The normal quests, which are just run in attack enemies with your very repetitive, never changing attack pattern. With these quests, the game just constantly recycles them as well. So if you go through enough quests in the game, it'll just recycle you the ones you've already done. So you're just gonna keep doing arena style battles and there's nothing really entertaining to do either. And the thing is, as you can see from the name of the arcs, you're gonna be doing a lot of these quests towards the end of the game. Also, there's another funny thing I noticed in one of the zones, which is that the exit point of the dungeons, which is typically behind you, for some of the maps for the quest specifically, because they don't spawn you at the entrance itself, but instead put you at a random point, the hitboxes don't actually encompass the entire start zone. So you can actually just walk towards the start zone where you started from, walk around the exit hitbox, and just get stuck at the other side if you didn't notice that you initially started from this specific zone. Not a big issue since you can easily walk back around again in the end, but the fact that they just forgot to deal with the hitboxes in a proper manner is just very telling of the quality of this game overall, which at this point I guess no one is probably surprised. But yeah, at this point the game is still very direct, and when I say very, I really do mean very direct, because at this point the game, after you complete the 8 quests, still directly just triggers a dialogue where at the guild itself a knight just comes in and tells you that you're needed by the king. You go through a bunch of cutscenes telling you to go to the second dungeon with the princess. After that point on, the game gets very convoluted in a way that seems like it's designed to waste as much of the player's time as possible. And to illustrate what I mean, when you first enter the second dungeon, you start over here, right? And basically the way to the second floor is through this point over here. Well, you might think, okay, so for the first dungeon, you just kill the monsters in front of the crystal, you're done, right? That was the last, as I said, of the game being straightforward. Now, instead of being in front of the crystal, you instead have to go to this point over here, run all the way to the bottom of the map over here, and kill the enemy at the very tippy top end of the point. Did you think you were gonna get any form of direction as to what enemy to kill? Does the enemy look different from all of the other enemies in the dungeon? No, of course not. What, do you think you're actually playing a good game or something? Or even a mediocre one?
You've got you in hell, didn't you? Suffer like we did.
But yes, once you get all the way down there, you need to kill the enemy at the very bottom of the map and then run all the way back up to the top to find a crystal broken, and then you can enter the second floor of the dungeon because there is still a second floor. But thankfully with this dungeon, this is still considerable straightforward in spite of the fact that you're given no general direction to go to the bottom and that you're supposed to kill a specific enemy there. But the issue with this and the second floor is that if you didn't know what you were supposed to do, this dungeon, which takes 20 minutes to clear, could potentially take an hour because you wouldn't know otherwise how you were supposed to break the crystal, and you would end up probably killing every single enemy on the map to figure out. For the second floor, it's thankfully rather straightforward. They don't show you easily where the exit is, but there is nothing, no form of crystal whatsoever blocking from getting to the exit, which is great for us because it means that we can just run straight forward. But yeah, once you get to the second floor to the third floor, it just triggers another dialogue with the Demon Lord's son appearing before you, but instead of fighting you directly, he just BMs you for a little, sends more monsters against you, and really all you have to do is kill all the monsters on screen and run through the white crystal at the end of the map. And you're done. The second dungeon is actually done already. It's actually really quick in comparison to everything that comes ahead, because this dungeon, it has no boss, but it's a very good warm-up as to what's gonna happen in the future whenever you see a crystal. The reason why this dungeon is so simple is because this dungeon actually doesn't lead to the next arc yet. No. The reason why it's simple is because they still have a second dungeon inlay for you before we're complete with this second arc. Yes, that's right, once you get done with this dungeon, a new region unlocks and this is another town. You're not guided as to what you're supposed to do there, of course. You just kind of go back to town, kind of pissed that you didn't get to face off against the demon lord who would kind of threaten the girl that you like, which was that girl, which the game kind of alludes to a little, but not really, and the two of you don't really have many romantic interactions either, so it's a bit vague. But then again, for people who probably never had a relationship in their life, this is probably the best they can do. You know, to them, hand touching may already be something they might have to mosaic out, so this is fine. But yeah, just to show you once again how badly the idea of nothing is explained to you well can get, let me show you what you have to do for this subsequent part as well. So once you're done with the dialogue in the new town within the area outside the chapel, you're told that you should go and kill time while the priestess takes the princess into the temple to prepare for some ceremony thing. So where do you think you're supposed to go first? Or who do you think you're supposed to talk to? I'll give you that hint. Come on now, of all the people on the map, who do you think it is? We can make this into a little game, right? Do you think it's the people on the right side of the canal? Maybe the left side? Oh, but there's the plaza a little further forward. Perhaps it could be someone there. Well, if your answer was that it was the person all the way at the other end of the map that looks like a single pixel in the distance that you probably couldn't have seen unless you ran all the way there and spoke to them, then guess what? You're right! You get nothing other than more suffering with me for the rest of this video, but congratulations! You did it! You have to speak to that person first and then walk out of the map, and that's how you trigger the first and second dialogue. You then after this need to go and visit the clinic, which I think this time it actually was hinted in the chat, and after that, in spite of the fact that it is not mentioned in this dialogue, you're just supposed to assume that enough time has passed for you to go back now. And once you get back, you're told by people panicking outside the temple to then go into the temple, but instead of walking through the front doors, which you can obviously see in front of you, you're supposed to exit the map and then enter it from there instead. And then you just have to go out and you unlock the new dungeon. Thankfully with the third dungeon, it's really, really short if you know what you're doing, because with this one, the moment you open up the map once you enter the floor, you can kind of see the entire map, which kind of hints towards how small it is. The issue with this map is that you first need to get to the area in the center where there is a crystal blocking the way. In order to enter the area in the middle, you first need to run to the left end of the map, all the way to the tip of that small little dongle and kill the enemy at the very tip of it, all while avoiding enemies along the way. But unlike with the previous dungeon where enemies would have to dogpile you to kill you, with this dungeon, most of the enemies can kill you in 2 shots, so you have even bigger of an incentive to not interact with the game. Then once you kill that boss and run back to the middle, you then need to kill an enemy that's located somewhere at the bottom of the middle area, and that will then unlock the crystal at the right hand side of the map, which you then have to run all the way to the other end, kill an enemy in there, and then after that you can proceed on to the next floor, which basically triggers another cutscene with the demon lord's son. He's a constantly recurring character. He's like the family friend that you don't really want to meet. It's a little bit too smart for his own good, probably gonna grow up to become a drug addict, but then again, everyone still treats him like family because, you know, he was born into the family, we have to treat him nicely. But yeah, the really big issue of both of these dungeons is simply just the fact that, remember, if you die, you're gonna get sent back straight to the front menu of the game, meaning that if you ran through the entirety of, like, say, the second dungeon, first floor completed within the 20 minutes it takes, you get to the second floor, clear it within 10 minutes, only to die at the very end of the third floor, you will need to repeat the 30 minutes worth of grind again, because there are no checkpoints in any of these maps, there are no autosaves. You just go back to the last manual save that you made. If you forgot your manual save, Lord save your soul. And all of this, remember, is if you know what you're doing. The estimated time it would take to clear out the entirety of the second dungeon if you didn't know what you're doing would be about an hour. Imagine dying at the end of that hour and restarting the entire hour's worth of grind. Even if you knew what to do the second time around, it would still take you 30 minutes. But yeah, once you get to the end of the third dungeon, you kinda just meet up with the boss again. He just BMs you for a little before running off. You find the princess there because what happened was basically at the end of the second dungeon while you're running around within the town, she apparently gets kidnapped. And now you're here to save her, but you find out that there's this fairy Undine thing which apparently is protecting her and it's lending her its power to save the world. And so you now have her being supposedly more powerful, but you don't exactly know what happened other than now she is ready to perform the ritual. And so the two of you return back to town and you basically just have to kill time. The game doesn't tell you what to do. And this brings us to the end of Act 2. Thankfully, not too much to talk about. And this brings us to the start of Act 3, and Act 3 is a little more important because this is where the true grind of the game starts if you actually want to survive till the end. So once you complete the 16 quests, your friend, the guild master in the guild, tells you that he found a poem. You look at that poem and you tell him that it's probably nothing because clearly your character has only 1 in intellect. He is the caveman of Fallout 3 in RPG fantasy isekai form, and your friend, is proud of the fact that he's just a guild master of the guild, somehow tells you that he has decoded the entirety of the poem, and he proceeds to then explain it to your dumbass self what all of it means. And he just tells you that the princess is in danger, we need to help her. And you decide, yeah, why not? I don't know how he found out about this poem, or why he's able to decipher all of it, but I'm just gonna believe in his words because he's my friend, and we'll go to the castle to find out if the princess is safe. Thankfully, this part is relatively guided in the sense that when you get to the castle, everywhere other than the entrance is grayed out, so you know that you have to go to the entrance this time. Talk about the game actually letting you know where to go. Imagine that. Why can't all games be like, oh wait? But yeah, the reason why this is the most important part of the game, as I mentioned before, is because this is the part of the game where you're actually going to want to start grinding for money, because the most important character in the game aside from you has finally arrived. The character that's going to be your best friend for the rest of the game. For you see, in spite of the fact that the game doesn't actually tell you anything, at the graveyard of the church, a new character has actually appeared. And this guy is just sitting in the bushes over there. Now, you might think that like, wait, what, this homeless man is our best friend? Indeed he is, but he is no ordinary homeless man. For you see, he's actually a smuggler. Smuggling what, you say? Well, illicit power pills that give you more power overall. Well, basically, he just has a bunch of power pills that are gonna give you a permanent buff to all of your stats, and this is the only way you can actually increase your stats in the game. And that is gonna be very important because we're eventually gonna get to a point where all enemies are gonna be so tough they're gonna one-shot you if you do not grind at this point, especially in the dungeon right after this. And so what you're gonna want to do at this point in the game, which most people tend to do, is that this is the point where in order to hit the 32 dungeon requirement to get to the end of the game, you will just basically do all of your dungeon grinds at this point, up till like maybe 40 or 50 dungeons. You're gonna want to grind till you have at least about 72k gold, which would basically put you at 40 there about if you're doing all the 3k or 4.8k gold runs. If you're doing the 500 gold ones, you're gonna need to grind a little more. A little is a bit of an understatement, huh? It goes from 24 runs multiplied by 6, so that's like 144. God, that's a lot of runs. But yes, you're gonna need to grind a lot at this point, because if you do not do the grinding at this point, the rest of the game is gonna be hell and pretty much nigh unclearable, especially with the cheap shots that some of the bosses have in this game. So what you wanna gonna do is get that goal. Get yourself all drugged up as hard as you can, and with the newfound powers of your drug friend over here, who are basically going to give your entire life savings to, you are now ready to go on and face the rest of the bosses in the game. Because you see, for the next dungeon is actually very straightforward. There isn't actually much of a dungeon that you need to traverse. The moment you enter the dungeon, you're basically just greeted by 2 characters there who seem to know who you are. They are both like captains of some very important night division, it seems, and they are tasked with stopping you. You kind of have a banter with them to like let them to get you get past. They don't want to let you get past, and so you decide to fight them, which, if you thought this was gonna be a dramatic fight scene, you clearly have not seen much of this game or this video, have you? And you basically just run past them in spite of the fact that they both had an entire squad of the castle's royal knights with them. So 2 squads of royal knights from the castle along the 2 of them, and they all bitten in a cutscene. I mean, it's to be expected, I suppose, since no one in the entirety of the kingdom I can expect would have been as drugged up as we were. You know what, Jeff? You're right. I don't need anyone else, you know? I don't need any friends. All I need is you and this good old stuff right here. But yeah, this is why all the drugs are important. For you see, this is the point in the game where you finally get to fight Mr. I am the big bad mid-boss man, Demon Lord's son. And if you're as drugged up as I am at this point in the game, his damage is gonna be kinda like this. Poor Demon Lord son. You see, this is the issue with being a Demon Lord that's ostracized from the entirety of human society. You can't get drugs. How are you supposed to survive without drugs in this world? I mean, come on. The battle itself is not too difficult if you have potions and drugs stocked up. And so all you really need to do is just run in there, take his chip damage, and just punch him to death. This part of the game is a little entertaining just due to the fact that this is the first time you kind of get to fight him, and you get to hear his death call, which is like a... Yeah, I don't know what's up with that, but a very good job from one of the possibly best voice actors involved in this project, so I have no complaints. This scream is also pretty well memed within the community of weirdos who play this game. It is called the $4 million death call. No prizes for guessing why, as you can imagine. And so that ends the 4th dungeon. You don't really have to do much of a dungeon to begin with. You really just do a single boss battle with so I can't do anything to the player. And then once you get back to the town, the king blames you for his daughter's disappearance. Your best friend in blue then tells you that he has figured out where the points that the Demon King's son could have potentially gone to are, based off all of the readings of like the energy in the air or something, which basically just amounts to everywhere that isn't the town you're currently in. The king then just tells you to go and search for everything yourself, but your friend in blue tells you that like, no, friend, I'll help you do it, please give me some time. He tells you that he will help you to search for them, but he's gonna need at least a few days or half a day or something like that. He just doesn't seem to have a very good grasp on the amount of time he needs, and so you decide to just kill some time while waiting for him, which basically just hints to you that it is time for you to do more quests. Jingle! Woo. 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 You know, if you didn't expect that you were going to hit the 40 or at least 30 hours of game time a regular RPG would give you, you're sorely mistaken. The only difference is that instead of a 30-hour RPG with 20 hours of plot-relevant adventuring and maybe 10 hours grinding, you now have about 5 to 6 hours of plot-relevant story stuff, and then there's like 25 hours of grinding instead. But yeah, at this point you just need to run back to the main town and talk to the person at the guild hall, which is not your friend. I forgot to mention up to this point, but basically at the end of the previous part where your best friend tells you the princess was in danger after showing you the poem, he basically gets kidnapped by the king and thrown in a dungeon for being an enemy of the state or something. This is like some North Korea shit, I guess, where apparently just reading out a poem and talking about speculation that the princess might be in danger is enough to get you arrested on this wall. But yeah, so at this point your friend somehow also brings him back with him, while also knowing where the big bad is somehow holed up with the princess, in spite of the fact that neither is really explained to you. And at this point you just basically run off to find the princess, leaving the two of them to settle like whatever trauma your funny guildmaster friend had suffered from just being thrown in a dungeon for talking about a poem. With this, we're finally in Act 4, where after 3 acts of pretty much doing nothing but very boring grinding and running through dungeons where you don't know what to do, you're finally about to experience no, it's not gonna be something enjoyable, trust me. It's gonna be the true hell of this game. This is where it truly begins. because this is where the longest dungeon in the game actually begins, and also one of the toughest ones. Remember how I told you that you needed to do a lot of grinding and the boss was doing chip damage to you? Well, at this dungeon, the moment you enter the dungeon, most of the enemies here are pretty much gonna two-shot you again. So in spite of the fact that the enemy boss that you just fought just before this dungeon could barely damage you, enemies here, random mooks, are gonna two-shot you again. Like I'm telling you, the enemies here, if anything, they probably have been the ones who actually managed to get in touch with the drug dealer, because this guy's been way more cracked up than the boss himself was. And to quickly explain why all of this is so bad, this entire dungeon is essentially made up of 2 separate dungeon types, with no saves in between. It's just 5 consecutive floors and the boss. So, yeah, it doesn't get any better at all. So for the first floor of the 5th dungeon, essentially what you need to do is you just need to run through a very narrow straight line all the way to the end. Running through this straight line in and of itself can take 15 minutes. The 2nd floor is also just as narrow, but instead of being a straight line, it's a sprawling dungeon where you basically need to run from one end to the other end, and you need to repeat this, the thing that you had to do in the 3rd dungeon from getting to the left all the way to the right end, except that you have to do that multiple times in this dungeon instead. Like, I don't know what this game has out against its players, but the people who developed it, they truly just want to watch the world burn. This is their Joker moment, this entire dungeon. They basically put the enemy you need to kill as an unidentifiable mook at the furthest point from every single crystal. And every one of these areas has a very big like gap wedge area, so you're gonna basically have to run to one end and then run all the way to the other. And you just do this multiple times through. It's true suffering. But once you're through this floor, you're then on to the 2nd dungeon style, which is basically a castle. This castle was also going to be reused later on for the final dungeon for some reason, so you're basically getting a pre-look at what the final dungeon would look like. At this point in the game, however, it gets a little more straightforward again, thankfully. For the 1st floor, you just need to run from one end to the other end. Enemies here also two-shot you, so you're just going to want to ignore them and get to the end. You get into the 2nd floor, it's just a straight line down. There are crystals and you just need to beat enemies on one side very close to the crystal, thankfully. But yeah, once you get through the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor is kind of funny because like you have this entire area where you can see the map here. It's a very big and expansive map, but the issue with this is that the entirety of the map isn't actually used. You're just stuck in like a very small rectangle at the very top of the map. And you just had to get from one end of the rectangle to the other end. The rest of the area you see across the entire thing is actually not used. But yes, at the end of the 5 floors, you're gonna meet your best friend once again. It's Mr. Son of the Demon Lord. Except this time, it seems that someone fed him some of the drugs. He's a little bit stronger, but still not as strong as the enemies outside of this floor. Like, I swear, the enemies on the 1st and 2nd floor of this 2nd half of this dungeon probably have a higher chance to kill you in a single hit than the boss does. His hits can take you down to half, but he attacks so infrequently that as long as you have enough potions, you can take a hit, walk away, heal, walk back and attack him. The first phase is pretty much the same as in the 1st dungeon. The 2nd phase is very annoying and time consuming. Essentially what he does is he's going to teleport to a point in one of the corners and start shooting projectiles at you. All you really need to do is run there, hit him, he's invulnerable, he'll teleport away to another point and shoot you again. You just need to repeat the process of hitting him or he's invulnerable 3 times. And on the 4th time, he'll actually run towards you instead of just trying to be a little bitch and just shoot you from afar. At which point, you can just maul him to death. If you can actually keep him pretty much perma-stunned, he'll actually not repeat the phase. But if you leave him alone for too long, he'll repeat the phase and you just have to run around the entire map hitting him again. But yeah, as long as you don't die, it's fine. It's just a very terrifying battle. Not so much because of the fact that he's very strong, but because of the gnawing fear that if he somehow manages to one-shot you, you're gonna have to restart all of the 5 floors before this again. Which, if you're a first-time player, this could take more than an hour. Once you beat him, it is then revealed to you that he's actually a clay doll created by the lady all along, and he somehow didn't know this at all. That he wasn't actually the Demon Lord's son, he thought he was. Then the lady sacrifices herself, the Demon Lord himself somehow resurrects into the human world. Your father is still nowhere in sight, no one knows what happened to him, he still might be alive, who knows? But yeah, the Demon Lord apparently resurrects himself and is like out in the world now. You manage to get the princess back, but she's in critical condition because her soul got like siphoned to some extent by the funny lady before she died. You bring her back to the city safely, then you just get barred from the castle and unable to see her. But your guildmaster friend, being the very base individual that he is, he says that he has some contacts who can somehow get you into the castle. And this is where the 4th act ends, as you are expected to clear the remaining 8 quests to get to a total of 32 before you can progress, in spite of the fact that the game doesn't really tell you anything once again. But yes, with this, we're finally entering the final arc of the game, the end game to our shitty adventures of our life within this game. You go back to your guild friend and talk to him after completing the quest, and he will let you know that his contact is ready and they are in the graveyard. He just doesn't tell you who the contact is or what their gender is. You just need to walk through the graveyard and know that it's the person at the very end of the graveyard. Turns out it was the wife of one of the captains who you actually beat down in a cutscene in the previous dungeon against the boss. Not the second time you fight him dungeon, the first time you fight him dungeon, one of the 2 people there. Apparently it's his wife. He apparently is dead now. Apparently somewhere off screen the priestess person had killed him, and this is all being revealed to you now, before you never see her again, and he is also forgotten. Like I said, no one else in this game is truly important other than the drug dealer. Everyone just comes and goes. They're like a wave, It just comes in and out. But the drug dealer, he is forever. Are you ready? I'm ready, because this is where we get into the true meat and potatoes of this game. So once you get into the castle, you meet your friend. What happens is that he tells you that he knows where to go. You go with him to the place and it just instantly triggers a boss battle, but he doesn't help you, obviously. No, you're the hero. You have to do this here on your own. And the boss is essentially... They seem a little familiar, don't they? I don't know why, but I can't really place it, but I feel like I've seen them somewhere before. Because yes, the boss is indeed a reskin of the first boss. His gimmicks are pretty much essentially the same, except now that he shoots fire at you as well, but aside from that, his attack patterns are essentially the same as the first boss. The only difference I would say is that he doesn't really slam his fist at you at mid-range, and his hands are actually possible to hit, even without knocking him to the ground first. Both of his hands are actually just way bigger in terms of their hitbox, so you can just aim directly at them. All while his basic attack while you're in short range to him is just the same tool from before, and now sometimes he'll try to sit on you as well, which, as much as I like to have my face sit on, it's not by something like this, thank you very much. But yeah, aside from that, his gimmick is also just marginally different in the sense that now it's even more convoluted. In the past, you just needed to break one hand and then just knock him down and then climb the left hand and then hit the head. Now you need to break both the right and left hand and then knock him down and then climb up his arm and then hit him on the head. The entire battle, I think, took me 40 minutes. But yeah, after you beat this boss, something very weird happens. Once you beat him and the cutscene ends, you're not told where to go. But somehow, if you go back to the town with the altar in it, the lady is standing beside a portal now, and if you interact with the portal, you get teleported to another reskin of the boss you just fought. Except that this boss is even more annoying, because with this boss, his hand hitbox is way smaller than the second boss. So now you need to do the very, very, very strenuous and annoying task of hitting him in the legs until he falls down and attacking the arms until he stands up, and then you need to repeat the process over and over and over again. And on top of that, now you have even more parts to break as well. So the order of how you need to do this now is that you need to first knock him down, break his right arm, then knock him down again, break his right horn, then knock him down again, break his left arm, knock him down again, break his left arm, and then knock him down again, break his left horn, and then you knock him down again, and then you hit him in the head. And also this boss, both of his hands are actually tankier as well, so the whole process I think took maybe close to 50 minutes this time around. Essentially what might have happened was that a dev, while testing the area, left the dev tool or cheat in that area there, and just forgot to remove it while also keeping the entire area sealed off. And somehow they managed to sequence break the game so that the boss that you're supposed to fight at that point that chronologically would have made sense ends up being far later on in the temple for some random reason. Yeah, no, it's very weird, the entire thing that happens here, but it seems like somehow they managed to sequence break their own game while trying to develop it. It's amazing at this point. It's not even like speedrunners finding a way to break it. It's just them breaking their own game on their own. But yeah, the entire plot of the game is just not making sense at this point. Essentially, after that entire sequence breaking event happens, you're suddenly running into a room and you see that your dad is still alive and still fighting the Demon Lord. Apparently, he had been alive the whole time and been stuck in an internal limbo battle against the Demon Lord, in spite of the fact that you already saw the Demon Lord outside of this area. Yeah, the whole thing is slowly making less and less sense, but essentially you help your dad fight the Demon Lord in a cutscene, the two of you win, but your dad has to sacrifice himself in the process, where you step through both him and the Demon Lord in some kind of dramatic thing, and you seal the both of them together away. But then it turns out that the Demon Lord had a trick up his sleeve and he manages to absorb enough power and then just become strong enough to unleash his final form. You wanna guess what his final form is? Yeah, there isn't really a prize for doing so, because yes, it is a reskin of the first boss as well. Can tell a lot of creativity went into this, huh? But yeah, at this point of the game, you are still not gonna fight the final boss just yet. He just gets his final form and you retreat with your friends to think of what to do next. You get back to the castle, the king, who has basically been bitch slapping you the entire game and keeping you down, basically decides to give you a reward this time, you know. You've been suffering plenty for a long time. Figured, yeah, you could do with a little bit of a reward, why not? And the two rewards that you basically get are a sword that's pretty decent at least. It's not the best, you get way better stuff later on, but if you're trying to speedrun the game, this is apparently the best sword that you'll need to be able to get to the end of the game. And you also get a medallion, which is apparently one of the best in stats for its class, which apparently, according to the plot, it belonged to your parents, which the king somehow decided that in spite of the fact that both of your parents were dead, he was just gonna hold on to this medallion, which plot-wise didn't have any special properties to it. Like, he just decided that he's not gonna give it to you, probably to spite you again, because he just seems to really not like the player's MC or something. Yeah, it's a weird thing, but at this point it's a bit cool, right? You kind of get a legendary sword, which is best instead if you're trying to speedrun the game. Otherwise it's a bit mid, but put that aside. You also get a medallion, which is the best instead, actually. And it's basically a keepsake of your parents. The whole Kizuna, the bond thing of the game is kind of coming back. You know, you're finally getting to be reconnected with your parents. While they may not be there with you physically, they're there to give you strength in your battle or hit. Wait, how much is that worth? Yeah, you know what? Screw the whole bond thing. Who needs family? We're just gonna sell this thing and we're gonna buy even more drugs, because the only true bond that we need in this game, once again, is with the drug dealer. Because really, in spite of the fact that the drugs that you buy scale each time you purchase them, at this point in the game, after you've already spent 72k, you actually get enough money to buy enough drugs to give you stats way more than the amulet could ever give you. But yeah, this just goes back to the point I mentioned before, where with this game, it just really wasn't very well designed. Like, the balance and economy at this point are just completely off the rockers and doesn't make sense anymore. When it comes to game balance, one of the most basic ways you could do it is to just take a single stat in the game and balance everything: enemies, dungeons, item cost, item stats off of that one stat. So let's say, like, the most basic example you sometimes give is like, you take the player's HP and you balance the enemy's attack off of the player's HP. If you want a battle to last 3 turns, and there are 3 enemies per battle, perhaps you could have each enemy do 3 damage. So the player hits first and kills 1 enemy, 2 of them do 6, he hits the next one, the third one hits him for 9. And then on the third turn, there'll be 1 enemy left and he kills the enemy. If he does not kill the enemy will kill him. So either way, it lasts 3 turns. Or if you have 1 defense and your attack defense is just attack minus defense, you just give them maybe 4 attack, and then you just give the player 1 or 2 defense based off how many turns you want the battle to last. And then you can just basically give the shield a cost that makes sense to everything else in the game. So basically, if you have a shield that will protect you from 3 damage in the entire battle, you could consider maybe a potion would be around the price of the shield, but less, because of the fact that the shield is a permanent item and the potion is a consumable item, and you will balance things like that. The price of this amulet, however, maybe it was because it was meant to have a sentimental value, but the price that it commands is just so off the charts that it just doesn't make sense to hold on to it. Maybe if the game had some kind of karma system where you selling it led to some negative repercussions later on that affected the story, now in that case it would have made sense, but there's none of that in this, which is what makes it all just very weird. So, since we're on the topic of enemy damage, I want to quickly just introduce to you guys how the damage is calculated in this game, as well as to a term that is used in many of these kind of retro game circles, as well as in the more connoisseur of the filth sort of Kusoge circles to refer to this damage calculation style. The way damage is calculated in this game is very simple. You have an attack and defense stat in this game, right? Well, damage is just equal to attack minus defense. Yeah, it's that simple. If you're expecting some kind of complicated formula or a coefficient to ensure that you don't explode into confetti instantly due to a disparity in stats between you and the enemy, well, think again. There's nothing like that at all. And this very simple style of calculation in Japan is called the Arterios Keisanshiki, or the Arterios, which is the name of the game that this was coined from. Calculation formula. And this got its name because a speedrunner was running that game, happened to talk about this style of damage calculation, and that somehow was the thing that exploded in popularity to meme this sort of damage calculation, and so it just stuck like that in Japan. So here's the thing, right? It's not impossible to implement such a damage calculation formula into a game. In fact, many modern roguelike games and even games such as Fire Emblem use this to some extent. The reason why it works in many of these games is due to the fact that their stats tend to not go very high. They tend to stay at the low double digits or even lower for that matter. And for many of the modern roguelike games, the time span of a single run tends to be quite short as well. And what all of these mean is that you have much fewer variables that you need to keep track of, making it easier to balance a game around a simple formula. The reason why this doesn't work and why it gets memed a lot in Japan is due to the fact that it's used in a lot of RPGs where your stats can start at like 30 and end up at like 3000, and it spends like maybe 20 to 40 hours of gameplay, and all of this means that there is a very high risk of the game's stats balance going very haywire at some point. So let me try to simply explain what would happen if you tried to use big number increments in the Arterios system if you're not careful with calculation. So here I have a very simple scenario. I have a player and an enemy. The player's stats all increase by 100 per level, and the goal I have is to have the player beat the enemy in 2 hits, hence damage dealt is 50 to kill the enemy in 2. And the enemy will kill the player in 4 hits, so 125. Let's say I want to keep this going at every single level of increment for the player. So I want the player to suffer from the same thing if they met an enemy of the same level. The thing with this system is that I cannot just take the enemy stat and add 100 to it as well. So in a very simple scenario, what we're going to do is we're just going to take the enemy stat, and instead of increasing it by the 100 that the player is increasing by, we'll increase it by the respective stat they have. So every level they'll gain 100 HP, 125 attack, and 50 defense. If we do this, we can ensure that the player is always in a scenario where the damage they deal kills enemy in 2 hits, and the enemy's damage will always kill the player in 4, right? This stays the same all the way. But therein lies the problem of, well, what happens if the player is under-leveled for the scenario? In such a situation, what is gonna happen is that the player with his 200 attack is gonna do much less damage to the enemy than before. So he's only gonna deal 1/6 of the enemy's damage to it, and on top of that, the amount of damage he is gonna receive is gonna be more than half his HP. Because with the attack, really you're doing 1/6, because we're looking at enemy's HP here. But when it comes to the damage he is receiving, he's gonna be getting hit for 175 out of his 200. Basically, 2 hits would pop him harder than most pinatas would. And the same could be said for if the player's stats were inverse. If the player was the one who was higher level than the enemy, for example, we're gonna see the player do 200 damage out of the enemy's 200 HP because of the fact that they have 300 attack and the enemy has 100 defense. Because if you're basically gonna grind a lot, you'll be 9 overpowered because you explode all the enemies like confetti. And if you don't, you're probably gonna be the one who ends up in that situation. And this also means that the player stat increase per level has to be balanced a lot more precisely as well, because a single level difference, it can lead to a situation where you very easily end up being stuck at an insurmountable wall because you're either getting one-shotted or doing 0 damage. And this also basically sets level gates that you have to clear or you can't progress at all, kind of like with this game where if your stats weren't at a certain level, you just get one-shotted by every single enemy in the dungeon as well. And it's precisely because of this that many RPG game developers in Japan have messed this up across the years, that they now has its own term and it gets used to meme many of these RPG games. Obviously, in some other genres of games, it works and many people are fully aware of this, so it's not like it's just being used to meme all games that use it. It's really just to meme games that are bad that use such a system. But yeah, at this point there isn't really anything else to do other than to take on the final dungeon, because you already have the best weapon in class if you're planning to speedrun the game, and you don't really have to do anything else with regards to the accessories since you're just going to sell it for drugs anyway. The final dungeon can basically be split into two parts. If you thought that the first stage of the previous dungeon where you had to run in a straight line for 15 minutes wasn't bad enough, now you get to do it again. But instead of it being one map, it's 3 maps, and the 3 maps in total take about 20 to 25 minutes to run through instead of the original 15 minutes, because why wouldn't you want just a longer version of what you already had to suffer through? And the second half of it, basically, at the very start of the second half, what happens is that you basically go back to the castle that has been used before in the second half of that dungeon. And the dungeon's first and second floor play the exact same way as they did before, except that once you get to the end of the first floor, this random lady just suddenly comes out of nowhere and buffs you. Turns out this is the part of the game where all of the people whom you had completed the Born or Kizuna quest for would come out and give you a one-time buff, and each of them will have their own individual cutscene where they would thank you and buff you. So essentially, it just means that if you had done a lot of the Born quest, you would be a marginally amount stronger, but at the expense of you having to waste even more time waiting for cutscenes to load. So obviously, since we only did the one Born quest because it was wasted way too much time, there's only one person who's going to turn up here. It's a little sad, but it doesn't really matter since we already have the strongest Born in the game. But yeah, the only difference is that the castle this time around, there are enemies once you get past the first area in the second and third area who are way stronger as well. Like the second and third floor of the dungeon, the fear was actually in me, because apparently there are enemies in here who deal more than double the damage of any other enemy in the game up to this point, meaning that no matter how strong you were, they would still one-shot you unless you're gonna play this game for like 80 hours to get enough stats to tank through them. So that bit was quite terrifying. But thankfully the adrenaline from that, I guess, or the fear that was put in me, made me willing and strong enough to be able to push through all of it without dying a single time, so that was cool. But yeah, this part of the game is the same as the second floor of the previous dungeon segment that you had to do in the previous part of the game, where you essentially just run from one end to the other end, unlocking. And yeah, at the very end of this dungeon, you meet up with the final boss's final form. You don't even get to fight him in his first form, it's just straight into his final form. The battle itself, there isn't really much to talk about. It's literally a reskin of the previous bosses. I think the only difference between this boss and the other bosses is really just that you had to target a different part at the very end. You still had to hit both arms and break both antler things, but at the very end, instead of hitting him on the head, you had to aim for his leg instead of the left arm to climb up to the head. Yeah, that's the only difference. Oh, no, there was one other difference actually. It's the fact that this boss was also way tankier. And when I say way tankier, I mean like the last two bosses were about 40 minutes each. This boss was an hour and 10 minutes. Like, my balls were shrinking at the hour mark because of the fact that I was just so terrified of how long this battle was lasting. I was so afraid of dying because of the fact that if I died, that's an hour plus of hitting the boss's legs and having him sit on me again. I mean, to be honest, it was just kind of sad, the entire boss overall. Yeah, the boss was scary because he was very, very tanky, and that meant I had to use a lot of potions. I think I almost ran out of potions in that battle because I was getting very impatient and terrified near to the end. But we did manage to do it with me having, I think, like 8 or 9 potions left, which was very, very scary. But aside from that though, the boss's attack patterns were exactly identical to every other iteration of the boss before. Like, nothing changes other than the fact that the battle lasts longer to make you more tired and impatient at how long this battle was taking. Like, the entire battle is really just a battle of attrition at that point. If you were someone with a very strong will, you probably could power through it without any issues, but for me, by the hour mark, I just felt so defeated. Like, the fact that I had managed to get this far in the battle was great and all, but the cost of having to spend an hour just hitting the boss like this was too much for my soul to bear at the time. But yeah, once you beat the boss, the world goes back to normal. You decide to go on a journey to get stronger and prepare for when the boss eventually resurrects again, because apparently even though you beat the Demon Lord, he's just getting sealed away to come back in the future, which kind of makes it feel like you didn't really achieve a lot there. But yeah, kind of really didn't, huh? But yeah, basically the ending is just the cheesiest possible Japanese shonen manga ending, which is basically the "yeah, we have won, but our journey has only just begun" ending, which gets like memed to shit and back. This is basically just that because it's just implying that like he's gonna have an endless battle in front of him. Thankfully, there was no sequel, otherwise the battle might have actually been endless, as we see a boss that would have taken 3 hours of chipping away at his legs to actually beat him. Or so you would think, but actually we're not done yet. For you see, once you complete the entire game, there's still one thing left to do. For you see, in spite of the fact that the game looked like it was already very horribly designed, they somehow still had the free time to add a secret boss into the game which unlocks once you complete the entire game. So you can reload your save file, which basically puts you at the end of the game with nothing left to do. And you can go back to the first dungeon, and inside there is a very weird point at the left hand side of the map where there is no hint of there being an entrance there, but now there actually is one. And when you go in, you basically go to a second floor which was previously not accessible before. Bunch of running around, breaking more crystals inside to get through. You already know the suffering you're going through the crystals. And when you get through all of that, you meet a secret boss of this game. You wanna guess what he looks like? Indeed, it's a reskin of the first boss again, except this time the reskin kind of looks like an Attack on Titan thing for some reason. But yeah, you basically just get the same boss all over again, with pretty much the entirely same gimmicks all over again. You want to know what's the worst part about all of this? This boss, unlike the rest, is actually a complete reskin. Each of the previous bosses till now had some unique thing about them. The fourth boss, you had to hit him in the leg at the end. That's unique, even though not much. The third boss had additional antlers that you had to hit. The second boss had big hands. The fifth boss is basically the third boss. Nothing is different right down to the gimmicks. It's exactly the same. His stats, I think, slightly higher. So the battle took about 50 minutes. Yeah. None good, none good. But yeah, this really does bring us to the end of the game. Apparently when you beat the boss, he does actually drop a sword, and sword's actually better than your current sword. Although the only issue left is really that you don't really have anywhere to use the sword. So that's great, a weapon that I'll never use. Though there are some things that I didn't mention in the original talking about the entire plot till now because it's so non-essential that it really didn't matter. So I decided to leave it into like this mini appendix at the end. So for starters, there are actually 2 towns in the game that are non-essential. The only way to unlock it is to talk to the cat specifically in the guild house that will follow you around. Unlike the guild master, this cat actually follows you around in every single guild that you're going to in the different towns. And if you speak to it somewhere within the 3rd and 4th arc, you'll unlock each of the respective towns that I'm talking about now. And in the final town that you can unlock, there are actually weapons being sold that are actually better than the weapon that the secret boss at the end of the game drops for you, which is yeah, it just makes the secret boss's weapon feel even more mad. And the reason why we didn't talk about it is just because of the fact that this weapon takes so much time to grind for that it actually makes it not really very worthwhile to grind for, in spite of the fact that the weapon does give you a pretty good boost in stats. But yeah, it's just kind of funny because essentially it also means that the sword that you were given that was supposed to be a legendary sword that belonged to your hero father, essentially you could have just sold that off as well, which just makes the whole idea of bonds feel even worse than before. Would I recommend anyone plays this game? Probably not. Like, the past games I have actually recommended that, like, you know, you could do it, it's not too bad. I mean, with this game, maybe if you could save state with the Wii, you could maybe give it a try and it won't be too bad. But if you can't do that and you played it on the actual system like I did, yeah, don't do it. This is actually worse than that game. At least that game you had multiple different characters with multiple different stories. The bugs were entertaining to watch and see how bad they were or how bizarre they were. And really, the rewards you get from it aren't really that much, because instead of it being you getting to see very weird and strange funny bugs that you never expect would happen, you're just seeing how everything is just the same for the entire 40 hours. The quests are repeating, like they're actually looping at some point. The bosses are repeated reskins of each other. You fight the same guy twice. The enemies are all basically two-shotting you, making you feel like you're not getting any stronger throughout the game. The whole thing is not very well designed, in my opinion, for an RPG. With an RPG, typically it's designed such that if you were to play the game without grinding, this game would be challenging And if you found it to be too challenging, you could always grind to get stronger, but the grind typically wouldn't take up too much time. Maybe grinding for an hour would basically be enough, or maybe 2 hours would be enough to get you through most of the game, especially if you already were quite competent with RPGs. But with this game, it was kind of the inverse. Yeah, I would not recommend this game to anyone. But that said, this is the tale of the most expensive game to flop within the entirety of this ranking of the worst games in Japan. I do hope you enjoyed this video. This one took a hell of a lot out of me to make. Right now, the next video I'm planning to make is probably gonna be a little bit more current events, in the sense that it's dealing with something that's happening currently, but not current in the sense that it's happening as something that's like a new fresh report that people are talking about. So hopefully that'll be interesting. I'm still planning what to do for the next game. I already know which is the next game I'll be doing there for that, and there are more events I want to talk about as well going forward. So there's a lot I want to do. The only issue is that I'm starting work with the new company I'm working for, so gonna be a little busy. I'll still try to keep up at least the minimum 2 videos per month as much as possible. The schedule for all of that will be on Discord. You can feel free to check out the schedule there for both my streams as well as my video uploads. If you enjoyed this video, do feel free to give it a like and subscribe. Thank you all for watching once again. It truly means the world to me. Like the fact that we actually already got to 500 subs. I mean, to some people it might seem like a very small number when like big YouTubers out there like 10 mil, but like the fact that 500 people found my videos entertaining enough to want to sub is quite magical, not gonna lie. Hey, I'm glad you guys enjoy the content. I'll be sure to make more, talking about all sorts of weird things with the game industry as well as weird bad games from Japan in the past. So I do hope you enjoy. That said, I'll be heading off for now. So, take care and bye-bye.